There's no doubt the media industry has suffered a variety of highs and lows throughout the recent years, from Oscar-winning billion-dollar profit films to one of the biggest companies on the planet spending several years struggling to make a single film about a guy who fights vampires. So it's safe to say there's always going to be trouble on the horizon for the media industry. But in 2024 we are seemingly introduced to a new type of problem, one that is a struggle to understand even for me, and that's the fact that a lot of these companies seem to just be dumping their films out into cinemas with as little fanfare as possible. Not to say that big budget movies haven't just been dumped in cinemas before. During the late 2010s, a lot of the X-Men projects over at Fox were just kind of being dumped out and left to fend for themselves. But at least you could argue they were just trying to wipe the slate clean as they were in the middle of their acquisition by Disney, especially as Disney would undoubtedly use the Fox X-Men content for their own purposes. And of course, you have films that were supposed to be released in cinemas, but then they were pulled and placed on streaming services or direct to DVD instead. However, at least this shows that the company didn't have a lot of faith in the film and just wanted to get rid of it without paying the high costs and sharing profits with distributors and theatre chains. In fact, some of these movies can be used to draw people into subscribing to their streaming services, which is profitable in its own way. But lately this year, they just seem to be taking all of these high cost movies and just sort of releasing them without any acknowledgement, failing to bring in profit before being pulled at the end of the month and released on streaming, complaining about the bad profits while refusing to do any sort of big promotional work. A common theme you could apply to these films that I'm about to list is that I didn't know these films were out until I saw a review on YouTube, because it's true. A lot of these films just didn't seem to get promoted in any way besides the occasional poster on a bus and the odd tweet here and there. Before we properly get into it, I just want to say that this is my personal experience when it comes to looking at the marketing for these films. Maybe it's around your area these films were properly marketed and you've had plenty of warning before going in. But for me, I just wasn't really informed about when these films were coming out or what the plots were going to be. It didn't seem like there was a heavy push to try and get this to me. Furiosa is a prequel film to Mad Max Fury Road, a film that has had great reviews and, although not the most profitable, went on to be a cult classic in no time, with fans and critics alike desperately asking for another film with this sort of vibe and spectacle. And so, nearly a decade later, we got that film, with Warner Bros. Releasing some trailers on YouTube. I saw a few behind the scenes photos on Twitter, and that was about it. Not a lot of people saw it bombed at the box office, and it was put on streaming about a month later. The Fall Guy seemed like the perfect recipe for a box office hit, a big budget action comedy starring Ryan Gosling with the people who made Bullet Train and offering a small if dramatized glimpse of how things are handled in Hollywood, alongside a pretty decent plot. And it flopped tremendously. In fact, I saw more promotional material trying to tell me it was on streaming than I did trying to get me into the cinemas to watch it. Lionsgate on here for spending hundreds of millions on producing and distributing the Crow remake and the Borderlands film, and while I did see some posters and some clips on Twitter for Borderlands, barely anyone saw it, so it was on streaming in less than a month. And the Crow remake, I mean, I genuinely could not tell you a single piece of marketing for this film. I saw no trailers on TV, I heard nothing on the radio. I saw no posters for it, nothing besides a reveal photo released about a year before the film came out that didn't really paint things in a great light. Besides it being bad, I can't really tell you anything else because no one seems to want to talk about it. On top of this, they ended up being the studio behind producing Megalopolis, the latest film created by Francis Ford Coppola. That was pretty much entirely funded by Coppola himself as a passion project, so the only costs that Lionsgate would need to cover was distribution and promotion. And I guess they just couldn't be bothered, because the only reason I know this film existed was because of that clip on Twitter that showed Adam Driver on top of the building and this scene.
So go back to the club.
That's it, and it ended up grossing basically nothing to justify its $120 million budget. Transformers 1 was a really good movie, showing an aspect of the Transformers universe that was never really shown on the big screen before, and in general being a fresh take for fans to sink their teeth into, which is why it's such a shame that this film didn't receive the promotional material that it needed, because the only thing I saw get broadcasted was the first trailer, the one that was heavily criticised for making it seem like a generic funny kiddie film, instead of the deeply philosophical philosophical and action-packed film it is. You know things are bad when a random guy on Twitter did more to ensure this film's success than an entire media industry. Guy Ritchie is known for being able to make some well-crafted action films to the big screen, whether it be his more down-to-earth gangster films or his more fantastical Sherlock Holmes films, and it seems like the Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare was going to be no exception. A World War II action film focusing on a British military group leading espionage against the Nazis, with big charismatic action stars like Henry Cavill and Alan Ritchson being the primary characters, seemed like it would be a big hit. But here in the UK I saw no advertising for it at all, and it didn't even release in theatres here. You know, the region that would have appreciated it the most. But for some reason, they did decide to release it in theatres in the US. And surprise surprise, the craving for the movie wasn't as big over there than it would have been here, and as such it bombed at the box office and no one talks about it. Over $60 million pissed down the drain because they didn't want to release it in a country that would have appreciated it more. Like, come on, how can you have a film with Churchill in it not release in the UK? Speaking of films that bombed with Henry Cavill in them, besides Henry Cavill's ridiculous hairstyle and a movie trailer that had more people talking about the ridiculous CGI cat than the actual plot, Argylle was also a massive box office bomb. And while the profit wasn't too bad, it nowhere near covered the film's massive budget, becoming one of the first big box office flops of the year. And finally, we have Joker 2, the sequel to Joker that released 5 years earlier, and continuing the story of Arthur Fleck and introducing Harley Quinn. Now at the time, people were a little apprehensive of a sequel, feeling like it wasn't needed, but at the same time, the writer and director of the first film was returning to create it, and if he could create something as great as the first film, then surely the sequel would be just as good. And on top of this, the marketing for the film didn't start off bad. It showed us some small clips, some promotional posters and some trailers. And then the interviews happened. Now, interviews are promotional material as these interviews are designed to sell audiences on the movie and convince us to go see it. But all these interviews did was turn people off from the film. From hearing about its massively overblown budget, to it being randomly a musical, to early reviews and the director saying that the movie was going to be a massive fuck you to fans. And after these interviews, it seems like the marketing push for this movie just halted. No ads on the radio, or before YouTube videos, or anything to give it a big push on the opening weekend. And yeah, they didn't do well, the negative word of mouth was more powerful than the marketing, and the movie flopped hard, losing Warner Bros. A pretty penny. Overall, it seems sequels to previous big hit films and big current day franchises are the only thing being profitable, which conveniently means that everyone is aware of them and doesn't need to be marketed as much. But for everyone else, this is the year that production companies just decided that marketing their standalone films was just too hard, thinking that putting one clip on Twitter and some posters on a bus was enough to advertise the films they put tens to hundreds of millions of dollars into. And while some of these films aren't great, others are really good, and it's a shame that they got this treatment. And hopefully moving into 2025, we'll start to see these big budget films actually get some marketing behind them. Thanks for watching, lads and lasses. If you enjoyed this video, please consider liking, subscribing and checking out some of my other videos. Sharing always helps, and if you're feeling really generous, please consider my Patreon or YouTube membership. I also have a Twitter and occasionally I do live streams. But most of all, I just hope you had a great day, and hopefully I will see you in the next video.